What's up, guys? We are talking about ways to build the aerobic system. We're gonna go through 2 specific measures today. I'm gonna show you how to do it. I'm gonna give you guidelines. We're gonna start right now. All right, guys, so let's first talk about why you might want to include some form of aerobic training in your programming. First and foremost, there is a ton of data that supports the lifespan of someone as it relates to their aerobic fitness. Okay, they've looked at endurance athletes and they've seen a correlation between how long someone's lived and their things like their VO2 max. So if we just kind of boil that down as looking at more of our aerobic system, things like our resting heart rate, things like our ability to recover between both sets and our sessions is largely related to someone's level of aerobic fitness. Now, I tend to see people that come from the endurance background that can handle more volume, they can handle stress, they're able to recover faster between sessions and even in the session itself. Those things alone, someone being able to live longer from prioritizing a certain type of training is, I would say, enough reason to prioritize this type of training. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have seen people that are against this style of training for a few reasons. One, they think it impedes strength development, which we know isn't the case, but of course there are ways that that could be the case, which we will talk about. Another aspect of a reason why someone might not want to do aerobic training is they think that it will impede things like fat loss as well as their ability to gain lean tissue. Again, those things have since been turned on their head. I will be the first one to admit to you that I too once thought that was the case. Back in the early 2000s, there wasn't as much supported research, and there certainly wasn't as many coaches that were proponents of using some form of aerobic training to improve recoverability. With that all kind of out of the way, let's talk about the why. Why would we use this training? What is gonna actually happen? What are the mechanisms that take place from utilizing aerobic training? First and foremost, recovery is the most important aspect of making gains. We know that to be true, but how does recovery get better? Recovery gets better through a number of different things that take place within our programming. So if we're able to bridge the gap between things like higher threshold, higher intensity sessions, then we can not only put you in a better place to make more gains, but also avoid things like overtraining. When we think about the aerobic system as a whole, if we have the ability to recover better, what does that mean in terms of the actual physiology? Well, one thing that happens with a consistent doses of aerobic training is that we develop more capillaries. This allows us to, in essence, transfer more nutrients and oxygen to working muscle. Now, if we think about capillaries as like roads, if you have a bigger road, obviously more cars can pass down that road at the same time. That is the same thing that happens with more capillaries. We have more surface area to deliver nutrients and oxygen to skeletal muscle, and thus we have the ability to recover better. Another aspect that we know is that mitochondria, we have more mitochondria, which allows us to, again, facilitate the repair process. All of these things are all well and good, and it synergizes with our programming to not only bridge that gap, as I said, where we're essentially able to do a high intensity session on one day and then an aerobic session in between and not burn out or not put people in a place where they could experience some type of central fatigue, but it allows us to constantly be working on where we might be weakest, which is our aerobic system. A lot of people have a lot of low-hanging fruit as far as aerobic development is concerned. Now, if all that aside, and we're thinking about just what the world consists of today, we live in a very stressed out world. People are chronically stressed. Disease, obesity, all of these things play into the bigger picture. Does someone that is chronically stressed out need to do high intensity sessions after high intensity sessions? I would argue no, they do not. They likely need more aerobic work. And then we could be more strategic about where we put those high intensity sessions. So I'm not saying high intensity training is bad. Don't take that to mean that. What I am saying is that we need to be very strategic about where we place that stuff within our programming. It can't just happen every day and someone's already chronically stressed out and you're having them do high intensity session after high intensity session, then you are invariably going to run the risk of overtraining. And overtraining can manifest in a variety of ways. It doesn't have to be just I'm injured or I have these nagging aches and pains. It can be lack of motivation, which is a classic sign of overtraining. This form of training allows us to do that, to, again, as I say, bridge the gap. I feel like I've said that already 3 times now, but that is, I think, for me, one of the best things with a great program is that there are things in between that build in recovery. Key point, build in recovery in your program. Don't just throw stuff against the wall and to see what sticks. Aerobic training is going to allow you to do that. Now, if we're thinking about doses in terms of what can we use with aerobic training where we're not going to put people in a position where they potentially lose lean tissue or they lose strength. We can use methods like I'm going to talk about in this video to allow us to do that and keep the dose on the lower end of things so where you're not spilling over and essentially putting you in a position where it could suffer setbacks with other forms of your training. All right, guys, so the first method we're talking about to improve the aerobic system is called the cardiac output method. Cardiac output is a product of stroke volume and heart rate. And essentially what this means is it's the amount of blood that we can pump to the extremities in the course of 1 minute, particularly from the left ventricle of the heart. Now, cardiac output is, in essence, steady state zone 2, so 60 to 70% of your max heart rate for an extended period of time. That time being at least 20 minutes, but on the optimal end, I would say more towards the 30-minute range. Okay, now if I have a client that has never done any steady state cardio and I subject them to the longer end of the range right out of the gate, sometimes that can be a lot for them out of the gate, depending on what you're using for measures to get them there. Typically, I will start someone in the 20-minute range, but if we're boiling this down to the best practices for this, we're looking at slower conversational work for the duration, and we want to use measures that don't spike the heart rate too much. An air bike at a steady state, or a rower, or a Stairmaster, or any type of cyclical piece will allow us to do that. Now, one of the criticisms of steady state cardio is that it's monotonous, it's boring, I don't want to do it, it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. The key element of this style of work is keeping the heart rate in the correct range, which again is 60 to 70%. If we go outside of that, a lot of times people think, well, if I go harder, I should get more, right? No, not in this case, because we are looking to essentially experience more stretching of the left ventricle of the heart, okay? And it's called eccentric hypertrophy of the heart. And this allows us more cavity volume, and thus we've got better cardiac output, better ability to pump more blood to the extremities. So remember that keeping the heart rate in the desired range is going to be your best bet. So I like to prescribe ranges. I like to tell people, to use a certain number so they can know exactly what they want to do. If I have a client that's 45 years age, I will likely give him the exact prescription so he knows where I would like him to be. They are also going to know that if they go outside of that, that we're taking away from what we're looking for. And if you go too far outside of that, we can run into other risks such as overtraining and essentially miss the boat altogether. So key element is using cyclical measures and doing it for longer durations of time, 20 plus minutes. And again, 30 to 40 minutes is going to be the sweet spot for most people. Of course, if you're an endurance athlete already and you're already well trained, you have a good capacity, you're certainly going to need to go longer. But as it relates to more general fitness and for the people that I work with, which I would classify more as like the everyday athlete, 30 minutes of cardiac output work a couple times a week is going to be more than enough to, again, bridge that gap between our main sessions. Now, another thing that we can think of with this work is that what if you don't have an air bike? What if you don't have a cyclical piece? Well, you could use things like jumping rope. You could use things like jogging. Jogging, I will add the disclaimer that if you're not a great jogger or it flares up any nagging aches and pains, it might not be the best route to go. A lot of times jogging can put people in a position where not only do they spike their heart rate too high, but it ends up kind of spilling over into some of their other training sessions. So that's going to be kind of a case-by-case basis. But one thing I like to do with this style of work is I like to add in other elements. Now, if I perform this for 30 minutes and I do a set on the air bike, I do a set of jumping rope, or I do a set of some light kettlebell work, then I can still keep my heart rate right in the correct range. But what you want to try to stay away from is prescribing the wrong patterns that work a lot of musculature. Something like a burpee or a thruster is not going to be a great fit for this because it's going to spike your heart rate up way high and essentially take you out of that range that we would like you to be in. Overall, key elements of this. Keep it conversational. If you don't have a heart rate monitor, it should be conversational. If you start getting outside of the point where you don't feel like you can carry on a conversation, you're likely going too hard. Point number 2, use measures that don't spike the heart rate too high. Air bike, rower, jumping rope, light kettlebell work, even some body weight movements mixed in there can get you to where you need to go. And this style of work I program, it's in my program every program I write, it's in there at least a few times a week, and we vary it a number of ways to keep it interesting. All right, guys, our second method to build the aerobic system is called mixed modality style conditioning. This is a higher intensity aerobic method, okay? So it's not going to feel like the cardiac output method. It's going to feel quite a bit harder. We're going to arrive at this a few different ways. We're going to use a few different measures. So it's certainly going to be more fun, but there are some very specific guidelines that I want you guys to try to adhere to when doing this. Number one, we are going to use a cyclical piece. Air bike, highly recommended. A lot of people love to hate this thing. I am one of them. This is a great piece of equipment for both lower intensity aerobic work, like I mentioned, but also the higher intensity aerobic work, like our mixed modality style work. Now, the guidelines for mixed modality style conditioning is going to be higher in terms of overall output. So we're looking at more zone 3 or zone 4. So think about 70 to 80% of max heart rate, and you will use rest intervals with this, okay? So my preferred way to deliver a mixed modality style conditioning piece is using one cyclical piece. And again, you could use a something like an air runner, a non-motorized treadmill. You could use the air bike, which again is my preference. I even sometimes throw in a sled push, where we're pushing with maximal intent with a really light load or even an empty sled. And usually, most times, I will pair some form of kettlebell work with this. I bias the kettlebells for conditioning using things like cleans, snatches, overhead presses, a variety of different complexes that you can do with kettlebells over the barbell. You might be thinking, well, why not use the barbell? Could you use the barbell? You certainly can, but my preference is kettlebells for a few reasons. Number one, they move more freely, so you have more of a unilateral type action with using kettlebells as opposed to a fixed implement like a barbell. Number two, it's a lot easier for most people to go overhead. You might be a person that's got no issue going overhead. Great, go overhead, use the barbell. But because the kettlebell, again, moves more freely, it tends to be more advantageous for more people, and it allows the shoulders to actually stay in a better position, more centration, so we have more ball and socket contact, as opposed to the barbell, where a lot of times people have to create range of motion by lumbar extension and different compensation patterns. So I like it for that. As far as conditioning, we're thinking about what is better for conditioning. Kettlebells will elicit a higher spike in heart rate than a barbell. I've tested it many times, and I find the same thing to be true. Anytime I perform the same complex with a barbell versus kettlebell, kettlebells always outshine in terms of overall heart rate. So if conditioning is the goal, kettlebells are a great way to not only keep things fun, perform higher skill movements like cleans and snatches and overhead presses in conjunction with our cyclical piece, and have it play out very well. Now, as far as prescription for this, a lot of times what I say to people, instead of saying, hey, rest 2 minutes, is I say, rest until your heart rate comes down to 110. Okay, and this is, again, not going to be complete recovery, but it's going to be enough recovery to repeat and duplicate the level of output that you had, say, on round 1, and have that same output on round 5. All right, so using a specific guideline. Now, based on someone's level of conditioning, it could take them 3 minutes to get down to 110. Or on the other end, you might have someone well-trained that only takes 90 seconds or 2 minutes to get down. This is something we track in our programming. Usually when I use a progression with a conditioning piece, the progression is built in where people's heart rate will naturally get better. They'll get more accustomed to the workout, which is a form of progression in and of itself. So if you're looking to program some mixed modality style work, do it over the course of a few weeks. I recommend 3 weeks, where your clients will be able to actually see that, wow, on week 1, it took me 3 minutes. On week 2, it took me 2 minutes and 20 seconds to get from 165 to 110, all right? So there's some good things that you can see in there. And now you're probably thinking, well, are they actually getting that much better in 3 weeks' time? That's another debate for another day, but I would say it comes by way of being more efficient, being able to use their energy, have more control of their pacing and control of their breath better. So again, over the long haul, if you have conditioning pieces like that in your programming, yes, the progression will be there. They will get better. Is it gonna come in 3 weeks? Probably not, okay? But this is a piece of the conditioning puzzle, all right? So mixed modality style work, if you are someone that loves CrossFit and wants to train similarly to that without having to use a barbell or to do high skill movements, this is the method of choice. If you like this content, be sure to like, comment, subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you on the next video. Remember guys, results are king.